Well, I think we'll change a little bit. In my talk, I'll be talking about the historical, archaeological, and geological information that we've used to reconstruct the mudflow story at Popocatepetl Volcano in central Mexico. And I'll concentrate in the second part of my talk on the more recent mudflows and their impacts. The area has been populated for many thousand years, and even in the, do we have a marker? This is Popocatepetl, and in the 15th century, a series of monasteries were built, about 14 different monasteries that have different types of written documents, some of which actually deal with the types of volcanic activity. And this was declared by the UNESCO in 1994 as part of our cultural heritage. The volcano itself is a very big volcano. It's nearly 5.5 kilometers high, and it's about 60 kilometers away from Mexico City, which has over 20 million people. Puebla, the other city, that's a very big city that's off to the right, has about 2 million people, and on the volcano itself, there are about 900,000 people living. So obviously, this is an area that has different kinds of risks with an active volcano. Besides the written documents, we have pictorial documents we've been able to access. And for instance, this is part of the codex, which is which was made in the 13th century. We can actually see how the ash was coming out. We have different types of descriptions. We have lots of information of this type. And although we don't have the written document right here, there was actually another large eruption in 1492, which flooded completely the entire northwestern part of the towns that were near the volcano and destroyed many of these constructions, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And this is another one of the eruptions, the one in the mid-1600s, where we have different types of descriptions. Popocatepetl has Plinian eruptions on the order of 1,000 to 2,000 years apart, but we also have smaller subplinian eruptions about every 500 years, and these smaller eruptions, which have been occurring since 1994, about each century. And the eruptions began in 1994 and are still ongoing. In fact, this Sunday, it'll be 20 years now. And the larger ones, the larger eruptions, the one in 1997, in June 1997, and this other one here in January 2001, produced mudflows. This, the one on June 30th, 1997, was produced by a large amount of ashfall on the volcano and nearby areas. In fact, we had slushy mud falling on Mexico City and with lots of traffic problems on that date. But there were also mudflows that came down to the northeast of the volcano into the small towns and destroyed a couple of houses. These flows were during the torrential rain season, and because of the larger amount of ashfall, it was a combination. But this mudflow is totally different. This mudflow is related to a subplinian eruption, which is this one, that occurred that afternoon, and it melted first of all, we had this high column, then this column collapsed to produce pyroclastic flows, and those pyroclastic flows melted part of the glacier that's on top of Popocatepetl, which, by the way, has been getting even smaller, of course, because of this of these eruptions. And then these mudflows on this side also came down to the same area that these other ones. So we had a couple of these mudflows that come into the towns on the northeastern part of the volcano. And we know that these are probably occurring if the activity goes up, and we know this because we're monitoring the seismicity, the magnetics, the gases. So we know that these we know when activity, fairly large activity, is going up. In case of the smaller events, it's harder to detect the changes. But so if we have these changes right before the rainy season, we're looking out a lot for these mud flows coming down on the volcano to the different sites and different populations. We made the hazard map also about 20 years ago, and we have several different marker beds which were very convenient to be able to note which deposits are on which side of the volcano. But as we can see here, these are the red, the more dangerous areas. You can see how these little black spots on here are all little towns. And since then, we have a lot of new information. So the government asked us to update the hazard map this last year. And this is the northeastern part of the volcano, but we can see that this area right here in the red and in the slash part, these areas with all these small towns, we know now that are covered by a lot of these older mudflows, and some of the mudflows that are less than 1,000 years old. But although these areas were covered by these deposits, we didn't know as much. We didn't have as much detail on the other side of the volcano, this on the northwest, which is towards Mexico City. So this area also has a lot of. Well, we've got these different kinds of debris flows, and we've got a lot of mud flows and pumice flows on that side. But we were actually able to map some of these deposits. These are the 14,000-year-old mud flows that are very big mud flows. You can see how some of these mud flows are also interbedded with some of the younger volcanoes from other small volcanoes which are nearby, these black ash deposits. But then we've got younger mud flows of these very large deposits. And if we look at closer, we can see some of these areas that even have much younger mud flows on top of them. They have the 5,000-year-old pumice and debris flows, which are very voluminous. But we've also got these younger guys on top of these. And these have what we call tepalcates, which are pieces of ceramics. So these are obviously in areas that were populated a long time ago, and I'm going to show you that in a second. When we look at the grain size analysis of the near facies, we can see that they're bimodal. But if we look at the ones, the distal deposits, we can see they're a lot finer grained because of this, that they're mixed with a lot of the water. And if we look at the pottery that's inside these, we were able to reconstruct different time frames. You can see this is a totally different ceramic than this one, and we can see them on the different deposits. These are from very different time. These are from the same time period, but these are also within the deposits, and these were the people that were living in the area and that were later conquered by the people by the Aztecs and the people from Texcoco. Before this, there was another event that was important, and we have pottery from this time in here, the classic, which the archaeologists call classic, and we can see how the pottery from the even older deposits are much simpler than these. So we were actually able to reconstruct the different times of these events. And luckily, we've been working with the archaeologists when they were making a road through there, and we were able to see how these constructions, how the people in the area actually came and they built. This is from one time period that coincides with that pottery that's covered by these deposits. These are actually pieces of this that are come into this. And then we have a second, the people abandoned this because of the lahars in the area. And then afterwards, they came back and in the same place rebuilt it. And they were again affected by this eruption. This is a Plinian deposit. This is one of the pumice deposits that's on top. And then they left again because of this eruption. And then they returned here. And this was the last eruption, which we think this deposit is from the 1492 deposit I was mentioning that we have in the writings. Well, obviously from this we can see that this is a recurrent phenomena and that there is a large hazard related to this. Presently, well, we see all these different deposits even on top of the cinder cones. And there's a lot of farming, there are a lot of towns, as I showed before, and there's a new gas pipeline that's going to be put right in that area. You can see all these different deposits, which are the ones I was talking about before. And although we recommended that the pipeline be put in a further south, it seems that that economic concerns have been a lot more important than this. So we've mapped the area. This is Mexico City, and we've mapped one of these mudflows all the way to the entrance to Mexico City. You remember I was saying this is about 60 kilometers away, so these things are very big. And this area right here is the one that has the mudflows that are less than 2,000 years old. So although these aren't as big as these huge ones, they're also important because they have all these little towns by. And this is, besides these primary mudflows that we have during the eruptions, we have secondary mudflows. This is actually more of a debris flow that occurred in 2010, and it did come into the towns on the northwest of the volcano, which were previously not even of concern to the authorities, but now we've shown that this area also needs to be monitored carefully to these. And to conclude, I'd like to mention that obviously these mudflows are recurrent, that recent work to the northwest, which I've shown you, shows that these mudflows go all the way even into the large cities, and even the small mudflows. This is 15 kilometers away from the volcano. You can see how the town is right here, and there's all the mudflows right on there. And obviously there's high risk due to the increased population and to the economic activity. I'd also like to mention that during this time period, we've had several different administrations trying to link this in with the previous talks. And it's very different if you're dealing with a small amount of population than if you're dealing with a huge amount of population like we are in this case. So although we have some monitors for these mudflows on the northeast, we're putting in the ones on the northwest now. Thank you. If you have any questions.
I actually have a question. Don't walk away yet. The pottery fragments that were found, because you showed some of the writings that have been done in the drawings in there, is there any indication of any relation to the volcano on the pottery fragments itself? Is there anything on there that describes some sort of history that they knew about already?
Well, the pottery fragments actually just have it depends on what kind of pottery you have, because you can see that it's a lot simpler. The older the pottery is very, very simple, and then the newer one has kind of they have lines, but they don't have the direct description of how the volcano works. But there is a sun god, a volcano god, a fire god, that's a pottery fragment. He's actually a guy sitting with his arms crossed, and in back they'd put incense, well, not incense, but copal and stuff, and they'd see how it was smoking. So he's actually the volcano god, so that's not directly in the pottery itself, but it's in the statues, and it's in the writings.